All right, looking at our participants list, it looks like everyone should now have access to record the briefing. However, if anything comes up or you encounter any technical difficulties, when the briefing is over, we will also have a recording that we'll be happy to send you. My name is Garrett Dietz, and I'm a Public Information Officer here at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Today's briefing is focused on recapping the opening weekend of the 2025 nine-day gun deer season. We'll talk about an overview of harvest and license sales data, the hunting conditions, safety incidents and reminders, and some important CWD testing updates. We sent out a news release at 9:30 this morning, which does contain the preliminary license sale data and harvest numbers for the opening weekend, so you can also follow along at that release. The link to that release will be put in the chat here, so you can click on that and open that up as well. As usual, at the end of the briefing, we will have some time for some Q&A. So we kindly ask that all questions remain on the topic of the gun deer season. And if you do have questions about other topics or don't get an opportunity to ask your question during the Q&A portion, you can always reach out to dnrpress@wisconsin.gov with any additional inquiries, and our team will be happy to help field them and get you in touch with the right subject matter expert or experts. So joining us this morning, we do have a few DNR staff members. We have Jeff Pritzel, DNR Deer Program Specialist, Aaron Larson, DNR Deer Herd Health Specialist, and Major April Dombrowski, DNR Recreational Safety and Outdoor Skills Bureau Director. So with that, I'll turn things over to Jeff so we can learn more about opening weekend. Jeff, take it away.
Thanks, Garrett, and good morning, everybody, and thanks again for joining us. This year, our opening weekend summary from my perspective in terms of hunter effort and hunter harvest is going to sound a lot like 2024. Our license sales are right on track with where they were last year, which represents kind of a stable license sale pattern we've seen over the last 3 years, actually. And from a harvest standpoint, our opening weekend harvest statewide is slightly ahead of last year. The buck harvest is up 1.4%, and the antlerless harvest is up a nice 7%. So that was good to see. And of course, there's various stories playing out in different parts of the state. The one thing we cannot do this year and won't be able to do for a couple of years is talk about a comparative harvest in the forest zones of the state, the northern forest zone with brand new deer management units. And there were some significant changes in the central forest as well. So we don't have an apples to apples comparison until we get a few years of harvest history in those new deer management units. But the central farmland zone, which is the largest zone in the state, and it got a little bit larger with these changes that were implemented this year, and it continues to lead the way and actually is taking a little larger share of the overall statewide harvest. So that's where we're at with our gun harvest opening weekend, around 90,000 plus deer. That brings us up to a total harvest this year, going back to the beginning of the archery season, of over 200,000 deer. We're at just over 212,000 deer now, including archery harvest prior to the gun season. We had pretty favorable weather conditions, and that's kind of played out how we saw the harvest. Obviously, people that watch the weather a lot as it relates to deer hunting, we're looking forward to some snow coming, at least in the northern half of the state. However, for the next couple of days, it sounds like it's going to be really windy as well. But we worked through those sorts of things, and it could set us up for hopefully a really nice second weekend with snow cover remaining on parts of the state after the storm goes through. And so we'll be having a conversation about that a week from now. So with that, I'll pass it off to Aaron Larson to give you a CWD update.
Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, everyone. So I just wanted to give a couple of reminders that you can still submit your deer for CWD sampling from the opening weekend, or any that you may harvest now on. So the locations are on our website, along with deer carcass waste disposal dumpsters. So those are also on our website on an interactive map. But I do want to just give a note that some of those locations will be removed during the later parts of the season. So just double check before you head out to one of those resources. So why submit your deer for CWD sampling? Of course, there's that individual information that you're gaining if you wanted to see if your deer had CWD or not, but also by submitting your deer for sampling, you're contributing to our expansive data set. You're giving us information on where the disease exists and where it doesn't. So we definitely appreciate if you're able to submit your deer for CWD sampling, especially in our priority sampling areas. If you harvested a buck opening weekend, or you do for the rest of the season, and you want to get it CWD sampled, you certainly can. There's a couple of ways to do that if you wanted to get a mount done. So if you're getting a full head mount, we recommend to ask your taxidermist for the inner part of the head, so they'll cape it out, and then you can bring back the inner part of the head to one of our sampling locations. If you wanted to get a Euro mount, the easiest way is to either remove the lymph nodes yourself. We do have some resources on our website, or you can make an appointment with one of the local staff in your area to help remove those lymph nodes so that you can keep the full head with you the whole time. And lastly, I just want to also give a reminder that besides CWD, we're always interested in hearing what you're seeing with our deer herd out on the landscape. So please report any sick deer that you see, anything that's abnormal. All of our reports are logged, and by providing this information, you're giving us a better picture of what's occurring throughout the state, can help us find patterns and potentially identify any health concerns that we want to look into more. So thank you for that, and I will pass it on to Major Dombrowski.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So one of the things that we look at are hunting incidents, and with opening weekend, before I jump into the hunting incidents that we had, I just want everybody to know, like, how are those hunting incidents reported or labeled? First of all, we have a self-inflicted incident, which is it's an unintentional or an unwanted discharge of a firearm to a self-hunter. Next, we have a same party incident where you have a victim and a shooter, but they're part of the same hunting party, or they're hunting together. And then the third category that we have is a two-party incident, which again, you have a victim and a shooter, but they're separate from each other. They're not hunting with each other, or they're not associated with each other. So unfortunately, on opening weekend, we had two hunting incidents that occurred. The first occurred in Grant County. This was a two-party incident where a 57-year-old male was a victim of a gunshot wound to his buttocks while walking to a field to go gun deer hunting, and was struck by a stray bullet. The victim was transported to the hospital and treated for his injuries and released. So that investigation is still pending. Next, we had an incident in Fond du Lac County. This was a self-inflicted, unintentional discharge of a firearm incident that occurred with a 24-year-old male deer hunter who was, again, a victim of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the chest. He was deceased several hours after the close of the hunting hours for that day by family members on private property. And the preliminary investigation, this was a joint investigation by both the Fond du Lac County Sheriff's Department and the DNR, but it reflects that the victim was in a tree gun deer hunting from a saddle stand when the unintentional discharge of a firearm occurred. Again, this investigation is still pending. And I'll have to report on those two incidents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, April. We do have some time now for Q&A. So if anyone has questions, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom, and I'll go through and call on you to unmute. Before we do that, I just want to address some questions in the chat quick. So Paul Smith, you had asked for last season's hunting data. Let me put that here in the chat. It was, like Jeff said, nearly the same. We had very stable license sales between this year and last. So that 2024 data is in the chat if anyone's interested. And then we also had a question. This would be probably for you, Aaron. Are there any other diseases being reported for deer in Wisconsin like Michigan is experiencing?
No. What I can say, though, is we do other surveillance, during this time. So we screen all of our deer for TB, tuberculosis, that we also test for CWD. We have not detected TB in Wisconsin in our wild deer herd, but all of the deer that we, about 18 to 19,000 a year, are also screened for TB as well. We are also during this fall season collecting some deer for SARS-CoV-2 sampling. So that's an effort that we're working on in partnership with USDA. So no other diseases to report on, but others that we are doing surveillance with.
Thank you, Aaron. Katie, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. If you kind of touched on this, but could you talk a little bit more about how the snowfall could impact the remainder of the season?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Katie. And it's somewhat variable, but because the conditions, snow versus and then the type of snow and then the temperatures we get afterwards, it affects both potentially deer movement and hunter movement, as well as just deer sightability. And so if as total hunting effort is of course different the second half of the season than it is on opening weekend. And so oftentimes we kind of just round up and say when we have snow cover on opening weekend, it can influence the harvest by 10%. It's really hard to predict. It's all we can hope at this point is that it will improve opportunity as long as the conditions hold out and after the storm passes, it'll just provide better conditions and it'll keep more people out hunting in the second half of the season.
Thank you, Jeff. April, there's a couple questions in the chat that I was hoping we could address. So one question from Chris Vetter was, did the 24-year-old hunters survive?
No, unfortunately, that was a fatal situation.
Yeah. And then a follow-up question to that, or related, from Mitchell was, any info available on the last time Wisconsin saw a fatality during the opening weekend or even the full season?
The last fatal we had during a 9-day gun deer season would have been in 2022.
Thank you very much. Another question for Jeff in the chat. What do you think led to the increase in deer harvested this weekend or this opening weekend compared to last year?
Thanks for that. It's, as is always the case, there's multiple variables at play. We have, opening day was one day earlier than it was last year, but we're still on the later side of our opening days. But as it gets earlier every year, it can increase capturing some of that enhanced buck movement associated with the breeding season. We didn't get a lot of reports of that being the case, that there were still a lot of, there's always some, but it wasn't strong reports of continued rut activity. But there's also availability of antlerless permits was up this year because of the mild winters that we've been coming off of the past 2 years. So a few hunters spending a little bit more time. And again, most of that increase was in antlerless harvest, which we're really happy to see for a couple of reasons. As we were promoting before the season, this is a great year for deer hunters to hunt for their community and contribute, helping with the deer donation program. And in the farmland portions of the state, we've been, aware that we've, really need to increase antlerless deer harvest. And we've been on this annual fluctuation for the last 4 or 5 years where we have a better antlerless harvest followed by a drop in antlerless harvest. And if that pattern were to hold, unfortunately, this would have been a year for that antlerless harvest to come down a bit, but we're glad to see that hopefully that pattern isn't holding. And so again, more antlerless harvest is the biggest driver behind that increase over the weekend.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other questions? All right, a question in the chat. What's the trend on deer population data over the last 10 years or so? Jeff, would you be able to talk to that?
Sure. And if someone wants to see that visually, I'd encourage you to go to our deer metrics system, which is a web page in the database. And you can go on our website and just type in deer metrics system, and you can look at our deer data, both our population estimate data and our harvest data over recent years. And when you look at that at the statewide level, it would give you one picture that shows the deer population continues to increase. A lot of that increase is driven again by the farmland zones. But you can then take that down and look at county by county and see how that's variable. But statewide, we continue to see an increasing trend in total deer population, most of that being driven by the farmland zones and really not specifically, but mostly the central farmland zone.
Thank you. Another question was in the chat from Matt Frey was, as you said, comparisons can't really be made between the forest zones, but is there any early read on whether the harvest numbers are on track as far as what might have been expected coming into the season? That might be a little speculation, but.
Yeah, it in general terms, it seems, as we're seeing with the rest of the state, relatively close, to, harvest patterns from where what we saw last year. The forecast with the snow coming in the next couple of days, especially for the northern part of the state, may really change the trajectory of what we see for the harvest in the north for the rest of the remainder of the season and the later seasons, compared to last year. So, but right at this point, things feel and reports seem to be pretty similar to what the experience was last year.
Awesome, thank you. And then another question from Ed Walters on license sales. So they said, with the decrease that there was in licensed and sold, is this a trend that could see less and less hunters going out and harvesting deer during opening weekends in the future? And I just wanted to clarify, we talked that licenses were pretty stable. It's like 200 licenses difference between this year and last year. It's a fraction of a percent.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, it's coming off. Last year, we actually saw a 1% increase in license sales, which was, again, kind of breaking that long-term trend. And a couple of years ago, we started talking about the decline, and we need to make a clarification between the difference in decline in hunter numbers and license sales, because we have documented a loss in total hunter numbers since the turn of the century, but those hunters that remain, and so we're still, just shy of 600,000 hunters in the state. More of them are purchasing both archery and firearm licenses, and so the actual license sale numbers have been more stable than the hunter numbers. But again, we've been pretty stable the last couple of years. And as it relates specifically to the gun opener, as Ed's question was, we've also seen the trend of those people that are hunting shifting more of their hunting effort toward archery hunting, just as a reflection of, overall enthusiasm for deer hunting. So we know over half of our hunters now purchase an archery license and have already been deer hunting prior to this opening weekend, which, again, still a very big deal, a lot of focus, and why we're here today about opening weekend, the gun season, but more hunting effort has already taken place prior to the weekend, and that's been a trend we've been watching grow over, really over the past 3 decades.
Thank you. And then another question, probably for Aaron here in the chat. Can you give an overview of CWD and maybe where it's increasing or most prevalent?
Sure. So the majority of our positives are still coming from Southwest Wisconsin. So, over 75% are really from a couple of counties, including Richland, Sauk, Iowa, and parts of Dane. What I could say is where we're seeing some increase of detections would be some of our west central counties. So Trempealeau, Buffalo, some of those are seeing a few more cases in these last number of years, Monroe as well. We have seen geographic spread throughout parts of northeast Wisconsin as well. So we have some detections in counties such as, Shawano, Oconto, but it's at very low levels. Same with some parts of the north, Oneida, Lincoln, Vilas. But again, those seem to be very low levels of CWD prevalence or numbers that we're seeing for positive detections. So again, the majority of our positives are still in Southwest Wisconsin.
All right, thank you. One other follow-up to that, Aaron, might be from Roger here in the chat. Any additional CWD reports in Manitowoc County this year?
So as soon as we have positives, we do put them on our interactive map and then in our summaries. So at Manitowoc, I will double check, but I don't believe we have any detections in Manitowoc this year.
Awesome, thank you. All right, any other questions? I see a few questions in the chat about Jeff's upcoming retirement. If you want to follow up with DNR Press at dnrpress@wisconsin.gov, we can help get those directed to Jeff, and he can follow up individually if any more questions. And then another question, quick, what needs to be done to maintain a healthy deer population moving forward? And do we see deer populations increasing in the Northwoods and decreasing in central Wisconsin?
Well, in general terms, thanks for that question. And in general terms, the deer population in the northern forest is really going to be reflective of the landscape and the land use. And so there are variables that are really not within the purview of deer management per se, but that we monitor and make adjustments accordingly. But land use pattern changes and timber harvest patterns in the northern forest, layered with winter severity, all have influences on a deer population. And so the northern forest will always be subject to a certain degree of a roller coaster over the years when those variables line up in favor of deer or against deer. And so the system is set up to make those adjustments with antlerless harvest more in response to those changes as opposed to directing the direction of the deer population, because a lot of the major factors that ultimately influence the trajectory of the deer herd are not the things that we have control over. And so we make our adjustments accordingly to keep that deer population in a position where it can be resilient, and it has demonstrated that in the past. And that's in the northern forest, and the central forest to a certain degree is following a similar pattern because of its land use changes and patterns on the landscape of both agriculture and forestry that really influence the carrying capacity of the land and where those deer populations are going to trend in the future.
All right, and then there's just a follow-up question on that same topic, it seems. Is there an increase in timber harvest contributing to a decrease in deer population up north?
I would say it's actually the opposite of that. Deer do better in disturbed landscapes with younger forest communities. So, deer are very adaptable and they can exist in many, many different situations, including old forest. But on a square mile basis, the more acres or square miles of young timber you have on the landscape, the more deer that landscape is going to support. So there's actually a very complementary relationship between planned timber harvest and what the effects can be on deer. But those impacts are long term, and that's one of the challenges we always have dealt with deer, is that things that happen this year as it relates to the land use won't really play out until 10, 20 years down the road. And so we have to keep that in mind. It's not what we do this year is going to impact next year. That's more where the weather in the winter comes in.
Awesome, thank you very much. I don't see any more hand raises, and I don't see anything else in chat new, so I think that should take care of our Q&A. So thank you again, everyone, for your questions. If anything does come up later after this media briefing, you can always send us an email at dnrpress@wisconsin.gov, and we'll be happy to help get your questions answered. Again, thank you all for tuning in this morning, and have a great day.